Again, I'm Rusty Hassan. I am a longtime host of Thursday Late Night Jazz on WPFW, which I love doing. But again, my real love is being here every Tuesday and Thursdays from 2 o'clock until 3:20, presenting jazz history to students here at UDC, using music majors who are learning about the culture that this music grew up in. And again, I am really thrilled to have a master class with Orrin Evans because we're going to be talking about Charles Mingus. Orrin has been working with the Mingus Big Band for quite some time now, and we'll talk about that connection. But we'll first talk about the importance of Charles Mingus in a little bit of a conversation before we do any music demonstrations. And again, a little background on Mr. Mingus. Charles Mingus was born in Nogales, Arizona. It was right on the border of Mexico. But he grew up in Los Angeles, and he got involved in music very early on. And one of his earliest gigs was with Lionel Hampton, who was very, very popular at that time. He had tunes like Flying Home, Hey Baba Rebop, which had nothing to do with bebop. It was more boogie woogie. But he was brave enough to let Charles Mingus perform one of his earliest compositions called Mingus Fingers. And it is really out there in 1947. Mingus then went on to work on a trio with the vibraphonist Red Norvo with Tal Farlow, touring the country. And that lasted until there was a TV gig. And Mr. Norvo was not very progressive in a way, even though he had an African-American bassist. The TV studio didn't want to show an integrated group on TV, so Mingus left that group and stayed in the New York area and hooked up with Max Roach. And here's where some real pioneering stuff comes into play. Max Roach and Charles Mingus formed a recording company called Debut. And Mingus did a lot of recording of his own ensembles, recording of other artists. And I guess that the one recording that really stands out is from 1953, when there was a reunion concert in Toronto, Canada, with Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Max Roach, Bud Powell, and Charles Mingus. So they recorded the concert, reunion concert, a real classic bebop album. And what wasn't told or as quiet as it was kept at that time, Mingus also took advantage of new technology, and he re-recorded and overdubbed his bass solos on the release of the album. And at that time, Charlie Parker was under contract to Norman Granz for whatever label he had, so he was listed on the album as Charlie Chan. Mingus then went on to start recording his own ensembles with various major labels, such as Atlantic. One of the real fascinating compositions that he did at that time was had the unusual title of Pithecanthropus erectus. And it was his anthropology may have been a little off, but it was his idea of portraying early man rising up on 2 feet, being able to walk. And it's just incredible. It's got Jackie McLean, J.R. Monterose, and again, it's a piece I always go back to. Then, around that time, he did a recording for the Columbia label that was a major breakthrough in 1959. It was called Mingus Unusual title, since I went to a Jesuit high school, I took Latin, and I found that that's how you decline adjectives. I don't know what that had to do with Charles Mingus, but it was pretty hip. Better Get It in Your Soul was a gospel piece. Goodbye Pork Pie Hat was a piece dedicated to the passing of Lester Young, who died in 1959. But the real interesting piece on it was a satirical piece, a real mocking instrumental piece called Fables of Faubus. People maybe go, God, Fables of Faubus, who's Faubus? And it turns out, well, if you were familiar with what was happening in the 1950s, the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 was not really being implemented throughout the South. And in Little Rock, Arkansas, Central High School was to be integrated by some African American students. And Orville Forbes, to prevent the integration of the high school, called out the National Guard. Now, as an aside, and I think this is really important because Mingus didn't use it, but at that same time, Louis Armstrong was touring the Midwest. He was interviewed by a student for a newspaper, student newspaper, I guess. And Armstrong was really livid about what was happening. Now, around this time in the 50s, I was given an album from my neighbors for babysitting. It was called Ambassador Satch. Louis Armstrong was traveling the world. He was the U.S. ambassador to the world about great American music. And Armstrong said, talking to the student, look, I can't do this tour of Russia, then the Soviet Union, if this is happening here. If Eisenhower will make the school be integrated, then I'll go. And he called Orville Forbes, excuse the expletive, he called Orville Forbes a motherfucker. The student came back and said, I can't get this printed like that, can we call him a plowboy? So that's how it was published. And so Forbes, got some notoriety even before Mingus put it to music. And of course, Louis Armstrong, if he didn't have an FBI file before then, was certainly put on the list. And the reaction among some other prominent African Americans even was, how could Armstrong do this and say this? So some of our perceptions about Louis Armstrong really need to be put in perspective along with Charles Mingus. So Mingus puts out his album, Mingus and he's very independent in terms of what he's going to do. He does another album on the Candid label. Charles Mingus presents Charles Mingus with Eric Dolphy and oh God, I talked to the trumpeter.
Ted Curson.
No, Ted
Oh, that's Ted Curson.
That's Ted Curson.
I don't get off.
It's a quartet. And they do fables of Forbes with the lyric, calling him Nazi fascist supremacist, and really lays it out. And that one didn't get a lot of airplay, but it said it all too well, And so Mingus already is really putting the word out politically in terms of what he had to say. Continuing until later in his life, on recordings, Changes 1 and Changes 2 was Remember Rockefeller at Attica.
Right.
And Free Cell Block F is Nazi USA.
Right.
Other titles like that. I'm fortunately old enough and got into music young enough to have seen Charles perform. I had a teenage buddy who would always encourage me to do things that were beyond my shyness and say, hey, let's do this. When we were 17, we went from Greenwich, Connecticut to Newport, Rhode Island, where I got to see John Coltrane perform. One time we went to the Village and saw Charles Mingus at the Village Gate. And I saw Mingus's anger flare up when some woman at the table, about a few feet from the stage, was talking, and he just stopped, chewed her out, called her a bitch and everything else, and almost stopped the performance, but she shut up. Another time I saw him was when he was playing at the Kennedy Center, and Russell Williams was interviewing him for Spirits Known and Unknown on WAMU. My wife and I were driving around with our toddler daughter, and so Aisha got to meet Mr. Mingus outside the studio, and I got to chat with him then. But the best time for a conversation for me was when the Left Bank Jazz Society presented Charles Mingus, and this was a group with Don Cohen and George Adams, and they had an after-concert party at a New York Avenue motel, and I got to go. And I was smoking back then and drinking alcohol, so I got to drink vodka and Donald Duck juice and smoke cigars with Charles Mingus. we talked about his fight against bootleg recordings, particularly the great concert albums that were coming out of Europe, and how upset he was about that. And we'll talk a little bit about when we talk about Sue Mingus and her taking charge of the albums. In fact, even going to the record stores and walking out with them, saying you can't do this. So, you know, I feel really blessed not only to have seen Mingus perform, but to have talked with him. I mean, God, one of my heroes. One of the musicians who worked with Mingus, I got to know when he played in D.C. was Jackie Beyer. Jackie Beyer is one of the real important pianists. His name is not as recognized as it should be. I know Orrin will say a few words about Jackie. Jackie was playing somewhere in D.C. and my wife and I had him over to our house for Crab Feast. And this was in the fall of 1978, because we were talking about Charles, and he'd already gone to Mexico to try to find a miraculous career for ALS. He had Lou Gehrig's disease towards the end of his life, which was so debilitating. And towards the end, he did some great recordings, not only with Don Poland and George Adams and that group, but he was ready to collaborate on an album with Joni Mitchell, with Joni doing lyrics to his music, and some big band recordings where he would just kind of be there in a wheelchair and have great musicians performing with him. I mean, right up until the end. And then the baton passed on to his widow, Sue Mingus. And sometime, it was in a few years after his passing, and this was another thrill of mine, all of his papers and everything was donated to the Library of Congress. And my good friend and colleague, Larry Applebaum, pulled my coat and said, "Come here, you got to see this stuff." So I went to the Library of Congress and saw all these scores and letters and everything like that. And somebody, I'm blanking on the person's name, a scholar up in Toronto, went through these papers and found that there's a connection, a massive piece of work. And it was the piece that was called Epitaph. And so they were going to do a Mingus Big Band presentation of this music. And that's when I got to see Sue a few times when Mingus Dynasty played in Maryland. We did a post-concert interview. But it was really for the presentation at the Wolf Trap of Dynasty that was really amazing. It was a big band. Wynton Marsalis' third trumpet. I forget who was playing first trumpet. My good friend back then, John Dix, was on piano. And the audience was light. And there was appropriately enough, a thunderstorm. And as the thunder started blasting, she said, "Oh, you ought to go on, come on down, grab these seats." And Sue was on the stage. And a year or two later, I was in Los Angeles for my day job with a labor union. And I was seeing Valerie Connemara playing at a Los Angeles club. And at that time, Epitaph was being performed at the Hollywood Bowl. And when I was watching Valerie perform all kinds of music, particularly that guitar Blakey. And at a break, all these musicians came in from the Hollywood Bowl. John Hicks came in, and there was Sue. And I said, "Well, how was the turnout for Epitaph?" She said, it was wonderful. But then again, it was a second act for, boy, I'm having these senior moments. Not Wynton Marsalis, his brother. Brandon was the opening act. She said it filled the audience up for Hollywood Bowl. I was great with that. You know, just so long as the audience heard it. You know. And I was really thrilled to hear that Sue was to be honored with the Indiana Jazz Masters Award. And if you were there at the Kennedy Center for that performance, you got to see her granddaughter do the acceptance. You know. What really surprised me was Sue Mingus was 90 when she passed. I was surprised she was that old. She had a youthfulness about her. And perhaps you could tell us how you started with the Mingus Big Band and your meeting Sue Mingus and what that was like.
Man, I was enjoying that. Like, I'm like, man, this is a lot of information. And thank you. So it's very interesting because the way that I run ensembles right now is based on a lot of the lessons I learned being a part of the Mingus Big Band. But I never, of course, got to meet Mr. Mingus, but his presence and how that band was run, not only through his wife, but also through his son, who was a part of keeping the band going. And it just really, it still had his spirit, even though I didn't get a chance to meet him, per se. And what is that spirit? Well, I had just moved to New York. I joined, well, not just, I had just moved back to Philly. My first gig with the Mingus Big Band was the day after Thanksgiving, 1999. And the only reason I remember it is because I had to go to Pittsburgh with my wife for Thanksgiving, and then I got the call. So it was like, I gotta go. And at that time, it wasn't for the big band, it was for the Dynasty. I'm sorry, not even the Dynasty. She had started another ensemble called the Orchestra, which was basically filled with, lack of a better word, miscellaneous instruments, bassoon, French horn, and guitar. It was definitely a different instrumentation. So when I got the call, I was like, oh, great, it's a great opportunity. At that time, my good friend Jonathan Blake was playing in the band, and he recommended me. So I had to drive all the way back from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, drop my family off, and then go to New York. And there was a little club called City Hall. But prior to that, this is before Dropbox, emails, any of that, she called me, and everybody warned me. And they were like, you know, soon could be a lot, just be ready. So I was on the phone with her, and she's like, you sure you can do this gig? That's how she sounded. And I was like, yeah. She's like, well, I'm gonna send you this music. And so then I was like, okay, if you're gonna send me a whole bunch of music, how many more gigs do we have? That's what I started thinking. I'm like, well, when's the next gig? Even though I hadn't even done the first one. But if I'm gonna put this time in, when's the next gig? And her response was, get the first one right. You know. Okay. So she asked my address, and she mailed the music. So I was like, all right, well, I'll look for this package in the mail. And there were two people. The other one is a great vocalist, Carmen Lundy, who did this to me. They sent packages. It was like a box of music. And so I looked, I was like, whoa. And it was every song that Mingus had written, from the big band to the orchestra to some of the epitaph music. It was everything. And then so I called her, I said, I got the package, but what are we playing on that Friday? She said, learn the book, and hung up. I was like, oh man, I remember just, and it's before, I couldn't sit there with headphones and on an iPod or nothing. So I'm putting in that box was also a box of almost 20 CDs. So I'm listening to these CDs and checking out the music, listening to the CDs. And honestly, at that point, I was only familiar with Money Jungle, which was a great trio record that had Charles Mingus on, but I wasn't super familiar with his music at that time. And maybe Haitian Fight Song. And that might have been from a commercial that I knew the music, but I wasn't super familiar with Charles Mingus. And then I also played with Johnny Coles as a kid, so Johnny Coles, trumpet player that played with Mingus, would tell me about Mingus, but I still didn't know that much about his music. So I had the whole package, listened to it on the car on the way to Pittsburgh, on the way back, got to this first gig, and we probably played none of that music. I got there, was a whole bunch of other music, and it was the orchestra. So I did the gig, and she was there. And when I was leaving, I kind of had this look like, okay, what's the next one? I just did all this work, you know. And she was like, thanks a lot, and paid me. So I left, and it took about 2 weeks, and she called me. She said, can you make this? Can you make, at that time, they were playing a residency at a club called Fez in New York, the big band. And the big band was like, for a young person moving to New York, everybody was in there. It would be Eddie Henderson, Randy Brecker, Earl Gardner, Conrad Herwig, Earl McIntyre, Bobby Watson, Joe Ford, Craig Handy, Vincent Herring, everybody. So it was a great hang just to do the gig where you could meet everybody. And that's what kind of happened on that gig. You met other people. But I got there and I did the first couple and had a great time playing there and started going on the road with the band. Still, in this first probably month or so, maybe 2 months, I stayed away from Sue. I just went to get paid and left because I was like, what is it? Come to find out we're both Aries. And once we figured that out, everything was perfect. And she was just a beautiful soul, but had to give you a hard time, point blank. That was just it. She would call me after a gig and she'd say, you know you didn't play that. I know, Sue, I know. You need to listen to how John Hicks play. Oh, I know, Sue, I know. Like, constant like that. But then we get on the road and we'd sit at the bar and she'd tell me so many great stories. And with such a good spirit. My wife was working on a cookbook and is working on a cookbook, and it was a cookbook of I'm using this term, but it's only funny because she didn't like it. Sue, it's jazz wives, women who were married to jazz musicians, and she wanted to do recipes. So she went to Charles Fambro. A bunch of people gave Charles Fambro's wife, and they gave recipes. She went to Sue. She said, "Do I look like a jazz wife?" So that was the energy that was always coming to Sue. And then she ended up emailing her a bunch of recipes. But just a great spirit, and I learned so much from her, and then I learned the history of that music. I wasn't, as I said, Epitaph, and even some of he has a song called Children's Song, which is a through composed piece. I had never really done that, but it was more of a classical piece that didn't involve any improvisation. And there were people in that band that were hardcore, Mingus. You had to play it like that. Like, John Stubblefield played with me. So there were people that, Ronnie Cooper played with me. So there were people, Jack Walrath. I'm thinking of all the people that were in the band at the time. So there was a certain way you had to play that music. But as it evolved, I really liked the workshop idea of that band. And by that, if you look and Google the band, it's called the Mingus Big Band Workshop. And in the 20 years, I did it from 99 to maybe about 2000. You're never really out of the band, but I stopped doing the band as frequent, maybe around 2015. But through that whole time of doing it, I don't think I can maybe count on one hand the amount of rehearsals we had. One rehearsal was because Elvis Costello was going to sing along with some of us, so we had to run those tunes. But we never did rehearsals. The workshop was the fact that we had a residency in New York, and we workshopped the tunes right in front of the audience every week, wherever we were. We went from Fez to the Iridium to the Jazz Standard, which was our last home when I left the band. But I love that energy because one, it made me work on my sight reading. Two, it allowed the music to happen. Everyone was on the same playing field. Yeah, there were some people who were reading the music who had seen it multiple times, but there were different people each week, so it was played different. A whole different rhythm section. Sometimes it would be me, sometimes it would be Dave Pikowski, sometimes it would be Donald Edwards, sometimes it would be Jonathan Blake, Boris Kozlov, Andy McKee. There were so many different energies and spirits coming in that it had to be a workshop. There was no way everybody was going to know that big old pile of music. So by the time I started my big band, a lot of that energy and spirit came along with me as far as the workshop vibe. And Captain Black Big Band, my big band, I probably can count on one hand the amount of rehearsals we've had. We run it at sound check where we send the music ahead of time and we workshop it in front of the audience. And I've always enjoyed that energy because it makes the audience feel part of the process. So there's a lot that I got, not so much musically, but I will say that part too, but more so from his spirit of how he led a band and then how he passed that on to Sue to lead the band, because she truly did lead the band. She didn't play an instrument, she wasn't on the bandstand, but somehow she knew when we didn't play the songs that she sent to us. We don't know who that spy was, but she used to send, this is the set list. And we look in the audience, and if we didn't see her, we're like, oh, we don't have to play that song. She'd know, you know, and she had a reason why she wanted that set list like that. So she was truly a band leader without playing an instrument on the bandstand. And I took some of that, because when I first started Captain Black Big Band, there was another piano player in the band. It wasn't me, so I could conduct and just lead the band. So anyway, basically saying that introduction to Charles Mingus was probably one of the most defining points in my career as far as a band leader. And then also, along with Sue Mingus, reading and playing these songs that Rusty was talking about earlier, somebody who wasn't afraid to speak up. And we're in a time now, and even when I joined the band, where I wasn't surrounded by that. I was more surrounded by, shh, don't say that in front of this person, don't say that. And then I joined the Mingus band, and there were things that needed to be said, even taking a song like Fables and Fables and then applying it to now. And he said it, and then he put that energy in the band for us to be able to say it, and to have that positive soapbox anytime we got on the bandstand. You knew what we as a collective stood for. And that was another lesson, again, that might not have been the notes on the page, but a lesson that I really appreciate learning from that organization.
Ooh.
How'd you come up with the name for your band, Captain Jack's Big Band?
But that also goes along with the whole April birthdays and everything. I grew up going to my Saturday runs with my father was to the mall, to the tobacco store. My father smoked a pipe. And as a kid, his favorite tobacco was Captain Black tobacco. So that's why I named the band Captain Black. But I love how it makes everybody else feel uncomfortable when you think it's something else. Unless you ask me, it's what you think it is.
Oh, man.
I got the cliche question now. Who were some of the pianists you were listening to as you were coming up? Who really grabbed you?
Well, growing up, Philadelphia, I didn't have to look far. You know, I didn't even have to have a record player, because my mother grew up around the corner from the Dockery family. So that's Sam and Wayne Dockery. So Sam Dockery. My uncle played saxophone in Trudy Pitt's band and Shirley Scott's band. So those were like the people that would be at a cookout. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I got to see them all the time, and they were definitely, if not in a formal way, some of my first teachers. Along with Eddie Green, Sid Simmons. Philadelphia was a great place to grow up, musically and definitely as far as playing the 88 keys, and all across the board, not just jazz. There were so many gospel artists that I grew up listening to, with so many R&B, just everything. It was just a lot of music and the arts. But as it developed, all the normal ones, you end up throwing out Herbie Hancock and Coy Tyner and those. But for me, if it wasn't for the ones in Philly,
right,
first on, I don't know, because they gave me the foundation of what to look for in the next people. Then that Andrew.
Philadelphia is so incredible in terms of, Ray Bryant, Bobby Timmons, being pianists.
Mm-hmm.
I got brag. I got the Benny Golson Award. Benny Golson talking
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
growing up with your John Coltrane, the connection that they had, his composition.
Exactly.
Never heard him play live, but listening to Bobby Timmons on the record, that's just a side note before we get you to play something. Jackie Byard was really important not only to Mingus, but important as a pianist and as an educator in the university of what you would put into a performance. It was always mind-boggling to hear him perform. And with some musicians, I was really fortunate because my wife's father was a jazz pianist who played professionally before he went in the Army in World War II. And when he came back, it was the cab at the post office. He played at family gatherings. And John Malachi was his best friend, and I'd hear the stories when John would come over to the house. But I did some payback to Mr. Barrett by musicians when they were in town. They wanted a place to stay, to have a meal there, not to stay. I'd have either to my house or to the Barrett household in particular, people like Cedar Walton come over. Jackie Byard had dinner with his wife Louise at the Barretts. But what turned him on was my father-in-law's train set, not the piano.
Yeah.
So, Jackie was so incredible out. One time I went to see the Apollo Stompers at the DC Space. And the band's playing, and Jackie's there. He gets up. Oh, there's Rusty. Oh, the band's playing. I'm embarrassed in a way, but it's just the way he greets them. And so after some years went by, he was playing at the Kennedy Center. I took Mr. and Mrs. Barrett to hear him play. And his wife had passed away. You could see the effect on him was really, really hard. And so he was somewhat inebriated in his performance. He kind of, in his talking, he was repeating himself, but he played well. And we went backstage afterwards, and he's looking at me, trying to recognize me in a way, and he looked at Tom Barrett and he said, "Oh, you're the cat with the trains." That was Jackie Byard. He was open as that. Just an incredible pianist that had a lot of influence on folks, and his name needs to be remembered.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I had one opportunity to hear him live. Not long before he passed away, but through good friends, I've Nasheed Waits and Jason Moran, I've had the opportunity to just share some of what they learned from being around not only Jackie Byard but Andrew Hill also.
Right.
I got definitely some more time with Andrew Hill, but Jackie Byard and Andrew Hill and Elmo Hope. When you go down that road of just, there's a whole list of. I just came across somebody the other day, and if I mess up the name, and he only did one record, or maybe two, piano player, trio. I hope I don't mess his name up. Out of Chicago, John Wright Trio.
Okay.
And a friend of mine sent it, and there were so many people out there that had a message on the piano.
Sure.
And sometimes that, it is what it is. Sometimes you hear, it happens now, you hear other people. But there's tons of people that have a message that need to be heard on the piano all across.
Absolutely. We had a radio announcer here in DC, on WHUR, when we were playing jazz. His name was Ron Stutt. And his line was, it's about the preservation of a culture. And these artists are names that, that's why I do this, to make sure these names are remembered. I guess it's time to put you to a little bit of work in terms of some lecture demonstrations. You want to?
I'm gonna play I don't know what I'm gonna play. I didn't, as I said, I was a part of the Mingus band for years, but I didn't realize until this week that I never played any of the melodies. Alan knows what I mean. So I was in the band 20 years and I never played any of the melodies. So I was like, let me look at these melodies that I'm gonna have to play tomorrow. So I'm gonna practice in front of you.
Wow.
I don't know which. Oh, okay, this is it. Yeah, this is where we're going. I didn't realize I was doing this early on when I would always write tunes about people. And I would write tunes about my peers, my family. And I remember a friend of mine telling me a long time ago, like, hey, why you always writing tunes about your friends and your people? So then I started writing tunes about other things because they said that. And then when I started playing with the Mingus Band, I really respected and admired the love that he showed compositionally to all the people that he played with and people that he didn't even play with. I mean, Oscar Pettiford was a bass player. He has a tune called OP for him. You got Bird Calls for Charlie Parker. You got this tune, Duke Ellington's Sound of Love. So along with writing for people that he didn't like Orville Faubus, he also had some other tunes that were definitely great dedications to his peers and other musicians, and I've always respected that. And speaking of that, you know, it was great to have a tune that I just recorded. Not sure if it's going to make this one's going to be on the outtakes, but I'll tell you about that later. But Alan Johnson wrote a tune called "Song for O." Was that the name? A Song for Orrin. I know it still makes me weird to talk about, but but I always appreciate that. You know, just writing tunes about peers and sharing that love, like Charles Mingus did for OP. So that's what that was. Duke Ellington's Sound of Love. Duke Ellington's Sound of Love. And there's some beautiful. Oh, that's the other part. And the lyrics Charles Mingus would write. If you there's a just recently there's a record where they did all the music that he had lyrics to, and Frank Lacey did the entire record. I think it's Mingus Sings or something like that. But check it out. There's some great tunes on there, and 90% of the lyrics were written by Mingus also, which is you know, amazing, because I know you don't want to hear none of my lyrics. So just be able to write beautiful songs like that and beautiful lyrics, or the Joni Mitchell record where she does some of Charles Mingus' music. It's beautiful. So knowing that side of him, and I didn't because I came first through Money Jungle, which I was telling you about, a great trio record with it's Duke Ellington and Roy Haynes.
No, Duke Ellington,
Max Roach. That's what I'm trying to remember what the fight was about. But Duke Ellington and Max Roach. That was how I got into Mingus before I knew about the big band and the epitaphs and all that. And then finally, before I say something else or ask questions, the other part of it was Mingus encouraged me to get some things together that weren't happening on other bandstands. Like we were constantly reading, constantly sight reading, constantly trying new music. And I thought after 10 years in the band, when I had been in there 10 years, I'm like, there's no way they're gonna pull out new music. How much music did this man write? And then we get to the gig and there'll be some more music, some other tunes that I wasn't familiar with. And I, you know, just getting that opportunity to constantly be on my P's and Q's, and he did that same thing with his band. That's why with the Mingus workshop, he was constantly workshopping new arrangements, new tunes. So that energy is something I already talked about earlier, but something that I really appreciate from Charles Mingus. Questions? Anybody got questions?
Hi. This is a thank you already for playing Duke Ellington's Sound of Love. I was back here. You know how Tom Cruise played the air guitar in Risky Business? I was air singing like Jackie Paris on the short version of that tune. My friend Martha and I were talking about the references, the Billy Strayhorn references in that piece, that allusion to Take the A Train, and then that kind of chromaticism from Lush Life. But you know, again, I think Charles Mingus's romanticism is also undervalued. You know, ballads like Self-Portrait in Three Colors, the piece you played, Old Portrait or God's Portrait. I mean, I think he was the full 9 yards, you know, in terms of combining expression and experience and all that. This is real fast about Sue Mingus. You do a great impersonation, by the way. I went to Goddard College in Vermont, and at one point, Dick Graham, who was Sue Marin's brother was president. And you know, it's like one of these events, meet the president, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm this hyper, as opposed to the hyper 66-year-old I am now, but I'm this hyper 19-year-old. And I said, he said, any questions? I said, Charles Mingus is your brother-in-law. I'm like thrilled, I'm thrilled. This was 75, right after Changes 1 and 2 came out. Anyway, Charles Mingus is playing Burlington, which is the largest city in Vermont. And President Graham said, well, you know, are you going? I said, yeah. I got to meet his sister. This was the band with Pullen and Jack Walrus and all these people. And she said, so this is my sister Sue. And, you know, I'd heard Sue's Changes, the piece he'd written for her. And she said, you go to school here? Yeah, I said, what do you do all these white people up here? You know, what do you do? And it was like she kept, and then she punched me on the shoulder like, you're okay, because you're young, and I'm meeting her, I'm a little bit rattled, but thank you for just, you know, there's the music and there's everything that goes with it. Okay, I'm calming down now.
But in addition to that, you know, when you can hear Strayhorn, you hear Ellington, you hear Monk in a lot of his compositions, but then you wonder, do you know, which came first?
Mm-hmm.
But also, he inspired me to be okay with stealing from myself. Because if you can listen to 5 Mingus tunes back to back, you're gonna hear something, you know, that was in one of the other tunes.
Oh, sure.
And I used to run from that. I used to finish like, oh man, I already wrote that. Oh man, but it's just really about acceptance, because you already wrote it. I mean, it's only 12 notes up there. You know, we're going to repeat them, and I've always respected how Mingus turned that into an art. You know, borrowing from himself and using those things, and then also taking things like that. You write a song about Duke Ellington, and you steal from Duke Ellington right in his face, and then you name the tune Duke Ellington's Sound of Love. You know, so I really appreciate how he did that. Did you have any?
Yeah. Can you speak to the relationship between Mingus' disposition and his compositions?
Well, okay.
You know what I refer to.
I told you,
when
yeah.
disposition.
I think he wore everything right out there for you to see. There was no, when you saw Charles Mingus and then you heard his set, you didn't even have to meet him to figure out what kind of guy he is. And that's something I've always respected about him. When I spoke earlier about him and putting an environment for us to feel okay stepping on the soapbox and having something to stand for. So there's not many people, honestly, that I feel that I could go see right now, watch their whole concert and say, oh, I know that person. Because we're hiding behind so many other things. We got the business, we got the internet, we got publicists, we got all this stuff and all these other people telling us what not to do.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't say that. Like, come on now. Let's somebody write a tune straight up besides Madison McFerrin, who I give some dap to. I taught her in the 6th grade, and now she's like all over the internet because she wrote this tune about Trump. But the reality is, if I wrote a tune about Trump and I went to my record company right now, not my company, but the company that I do records on, Orrin, do you think we should put this song out? There would have never been a Fable, like his ability to do Fables of Fathers and several other songs and speak his mind. You didn't have to go and question who he was as a human being, because he was telling you who he was as a human being right there in his music. Now for me, even though I didn't meet him face to face, I got to see the person you choose. He chose that woman, and she was right there carrying on that dream, you know. And then his sons. I mean, I definitely got to see his kids, who he was through what he left, his legacy. And that's something I can say I've been able, maybe Miles and Blakey, that I've been able to see with my eyes and say, oh, I know that person, you know. And I'm granted there was some other stuff that maybe we didn't know, but I got a lot of them by the way that they composed and the tunes that they chose to play and the way that they chose to speak in interviews and speak their mind. So I think to answer your question in a quick way, they were the same person, the artist and the human being, and we got to see how good that is when they are the same person, and we're not fighting, dealing with other issues, internally fighting, dealing with other issues. Will my record sell? Was this what I was? No, he didn't have to deal with it. Well, he did deal with it, but he dealt with it the way he dealt with it.
I just want to say this too. His titles were so descriptive.
Exactly.
He had one piece called "The Fisherman's Shoes."
The shoes
are
of a
some
fisherman's
jive
wife are
and
some
jive
jive-ass
slippers.
slippers. Yep. Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry, I'll go back and come back.
Thank you for making that connection between the man of the music and the man who he was. I had an opportunity as a student at Rutgers Livingston College back in the early 70s. Larry Ridley had a program called the Jazz Workshop. And whoever was playing in New York during the middle of the week, a lot of them would just come down and do classes with Larry. And Charlie Mingus did a master class on the bass. And after he finished that, I didn't attend that class. He came through the student center to use the bathroom. And there was a grand piano in the student center. And he sat down and just started playing piano. So I'm walking through on the way to class, an economics class, and I was like, that is Charlie Mingus. And my friend said, that ain't no Charlie Mingus. I said, yes, it is. And he's playing the piano. So we sat down. A couple of other students gathered, 2.5 hours. He sat and engaged with us, and one of the students asked him, and this is where the activist piece comes in, asked him, why is it that jazz musicians like yourself, why don't you own your own record company? And he said, that's like asking, how come we don't own Standard Oil? That was his response. He said, it's all about access. And when I think about today and there, and how the fight continues to be able to own that piece and own that space, he right there said it. And it was 1972, maybe 3, when I had that experience. So I did get to spend the afternoon with Charlie Mingus, and it was like a wonderful thing. So I don't want you to be jealous.
Oh, no,
that you didn't get to hang with him. But I actually got to hang with him and was like sit like closer to him than you and Rusty right now, and just listen to him share, and so open, like any question you had, he would answer, and then he would just start playing. Like everybody had to shut up. He's like, all right, I don't want to talk no more. And then he'd just start playing the piano and playing the piano. And most of us at the time only knew him as a bassist and not as a pianist. And it was an incredible time. So I just
I'm not
to share
jealous about
that.
the Mingus thing. I'm jealous about that you had the best time at Rutgers, because I went to Rutgers, but my father taught at Rutgers when you were there, when like at that time when Livingston, before it moved to Mason Groves to the other, that was the time. Shirley, Ralph, and all those people in the theater department too.
She was in a classmate of mine.
Yeah. My father was the teacher doing the theater department back then, so
And
that's what I'm jealous
and
about.
Avery Brooks, yeah,
Avery Brooks
was
was
a
there.
student teacher.
Oh my
of
God.
mine. Yeah, but it also was a time when Nikki Giovanni taught black poetry, Addison Gale taught, and all these other people, because it was a progressive setting, and
Freddie
you didn't have
Waits
to
was
have a
teaching.
PhD to be a teacher there. But but my day with Mingus is probably one of the highlights of that experience. Thank you. Yeah.
When you were in Mingus Big Band, particularly when you're workshopping stuff, how much allowance was there for innovation and improvisation by individual musicians, if there wasn't?
There wasn't much, and that because I got in the band, there was still a lot of the old guard, and I respectfully say that, but I'm thinking about one concert we did, and it was a younger rhythm section, and we were playing Boogie Stop Shuffle, but then it went into how can I say, it was a vibe that might have been, you might have heard it more on like Miles Smiles or something like that. It went into this vibe. And I remember John Stubblefield standing up and saying, "This is not the Miles Davis Big Band, it's the Mingus Big Band." So, and then we had Jack Walrath in the band who played with him. So they were dedicated to playing it like they played it with Mingus. And that was definitely a learning experience for me, because I was trying to find my own voice at the time too. So what I did find out is once, it wasn't that it was stifling you trying to find your individual voice, but it was an ensemble that, and is an ensemble that is dedicated to Mingus. So do your Mingus homework, come in with Mingus thoughts in mind, you know, and every once in a while we were able to, you know, take it a little different places, but there were many opportunities to improvise, but even the way that you improvise, they wanted it to be within, you know, and there were some great people. I mean, for me, I'm coming after Kenny Drew Jr., John Hicks, who else was it? Well, Dave Kikowski, but the two before me, before Dave Kikowski, were Kenny Drew Jr. and John Hicks. Wow. And there were times where Kenny Drew Jr. would do half the tour, and then I would do half the tour. So they didn't want to hear this 21-year-old coming with this new, fresh sound. They had it being played the right way with Kenny Drew Jr. and John Hicks. So I learned a lot about how to find my voice within the restraints of ensemble playing. And making an ensemble, I think that had to happen, because I do it sometimes with the Captain Black Big Band, in order for it to operate like a small group. And what I mean by that is the Mingus Band was so tight, and when I was in it, that we could be doing something and somebody could stand up and go right to another tune, we would go to. Or we know we were going to vamp, we knew we were going to stretch a section. It was definitely tight, so it operated as a small ensemble, even though there were 16 people on the bandstand. And that's something that I learned and took into how I lead the Captain Black Big Band. I wanted to be able, even though you see all these people on there, I wanted to be able to move as fast as a small group. And the only way we could do that is if everybody respected the dialogue and the language of the Captain Black Big Band. And the same thing, the only way that I could do that there was to really respect the tradition and the language of Charles Mingus, you know, and play that school. And then the other thing, if you check out a lot of the people who were in the Mingus Big Band, I did it myself with Bobby Watson, because when I was playing with Bobby Watson a lot, I would always sit down like, Bobby, you need to try your tune like this. And I'll say this in front of him, so I'm not talking behind his back. This is how we are. And Bobby's like, no, that's not how my song goes. So I was like, all right. So after about 15 years, I did a record and did all Bobby Watson tunes without playing trio. And we laughed for days. I mean, he was definitely honored. He said, I never thought of my tune like that. I was like, I know, that's why I could never do it for 15 years. So I did it this way. And if you look at some of the people that performed in the Mingus Big Band, Mark Shim, Philip Harper, they've all, Sibiagin, they've all done records playing Mingus music. But on their records, they do it a different way. So when we're in the Mingus ensemble, it's like, we're gonna respect this, we're gonna do this. And then you'll hear a totally different arrangement. I mean, Sue would probably yell at me for the way I just played Duke Ellington's Sound of Love, you know? So, but now she's not here and the band's not here. So this is, my tribute to him and that music is now I can play with that. But when I sit down in that band, there is a way and a respect of how the music should be presented.
Without Sue, will the Mingus Band and all its entities continue on? Will the Sons keep it going? Is it a real entity of making it happen?
Well, I don't even know if that's a question. It is. Yes, it is. Because I mean, they're still performing now. I'm going to do something with them tomorrow with two members of the ensemble, and they just finished doing the Epitaph at Yale last week. So the people like Wayne and Scott-Free and Boris Kozlov, Frank Lacey, Craig Handy, there's several people that are dedicated to that music continuing, and she created, with the Mingus Workshop, she created a core group of people, and they still work out of her house. Her office was always her house, and she still works right out of the house. Well, they work out of the house.
I don't know if did you see the movie, the black and white documentary on him?
Yeah, years ago. He's about Beneath the Underdog. Beneath the Underdog,
I
right?
know that story. Well, this man, we don't know whatever all he goes through, but he had been evicted from 5 other places he was trying to start his school. So he was now in the sixth place, all his stuff was there in one room, all front up to the ceiling, and the sixth landlord is now about to evict him. So he's got his little daughter with him, and they're having a conversation, very calm, and then all of a sudden, it went on for a while, Mingus picks up this gun, and he just takes it and shoots a hole in the corner of the room, doesn't say a word. It's like when you talk about anger, but he was there, but the other weird thing was when they finally let them all out, they all left, all these press people were taking pictures of him, all these press people, but nobody else was there supporting him. But that's really difficult to constantly get a picture when you're trying to start school. I just love the way he did that, because he didn't try to shoot the guy, he just like, that was great.
I do remember this thing, yeah, I
Well,
mean,
like, we get it off.
the other thing is, well, I'll leave that one out, see, I'll leave that there, I'll leave it right here. If I have to grab it again, I'll wrote it down. There's something about that I'll wait on. I think that's all I have.
Oh, I saw a documentary maybe about a month, I think it was the American Masters documentary. I don't think it was black and white, but.
No, she's talking about the actual movie, which
Oh,
is
the movie,
the other
okay.
day, yeah.
Well, this was something on TV, and it was really interesting. The thing that just blew me away was seeing this, you mentioned Conrad
Herwig.
Herwig. Is he still in the current big band?
Yes.
Because I've never heard a guy play a trombone like that. It seems like, was he put him in a kind of another category? It's just, well, it gives me a new appreciation for the instrument.
Trombone needs all the new appreciation it can get. No, that was a joke. That was a joke. But speaking on that, that was the other thing. From the Mingus ensembles when Mingus was alive to the Mingus Big Band, he always had a way, even after he's gone, through his ensembles to really have some distinctive voices and then all come together. You know, really, I'm just thinking about the people I played with on that bandstand. I mean, I had Randy Brecker. To sometimes Sue would mess up and book 2 piano players. So one time she booked me and Kenny Drew to do this concert, and it's one of the like, just like, who's gonna go home? I wasn't going home. I had 2 kids at home. I was like, I'm not going home. You go home? He's like, I ain't going home. So we split the money and we both did the gig. But that opportunity to sit next to somebody like Kenny Drew, he played Junior. He did half the gig, and I'm watching him play that music. And there were so many distinctive voices. You know, you wouldn't say Kenny Drew Jr. and remind you of Dave Kukowski, but when they all sat down and played that Mingus music, or Ronnie Matthews or John Hicks, we all found like a core place to meet, and I saw that happening in the trombone section, in the sax section, in the trumpet section. I mean, from Conrad Herwig to Frank Lacey to Robin Eubanks, all 3 totally different trombonists. But when they got together in that part, in that band, the way that his music, it makes you unite. It makes you, we all have this common thing, we gotta get this right. We gotta sound like one.
I was thinking compositionally again, and you know, you hear, well, various influences in Mingus's work. Certainly Duke Ellington, people like that. You know, he also talked about Stravinsky, and you know, if you listen to, well, 2 movements from Epitaph, like there's one, the Soul, which is based on the standard Body and Soul, and then the Starting medley, which is when I Can't Get Started. And I was listening with a friend one day, and he said, boy, I forget which one, he said, you know, it sounds like Charles Ives in a way. And I think, you know, Duke Ellington said he wrote music for the people with the ears, and it's clear Mingus had big ears and was able, but he was also able to make that, I would say, accessible. You know, it's like you could still feel, it was like Quincy Jones said about his soul and science. But I'm a harmony freak, so I'm hearing this stuff thinking, oh, there's all this polytonality going on, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, you know, it's not, man's fever is present, like poet
Right.
Wallace Stevens would say.
Right, no, definitely.
That volatility certainly had an impact on the trombonists. In 1962,
Yep.
Jimmy Knepper
Yes.
got
Calm me down.
punched in the mouth
Calm
by
me down.
Mingus. You know, the temper just would flare up. You know? Yeah,
It's so-
Jimmy Knepper, went back with him later on.
Mhm.
It's just part of his life, you know, and what Mingus did had a serious impact on our trombonist, Franklin, too. But Jimmy Nepper later on reconciled and continued out working with him until before Mingus passed away.
This is a rather personal question about Mingus. Did he feel it was necessary to address his volatile personality?
Remember I said I was gonna put that right there? I mean, I think the reality, I'm not gonna,
It kind of plagued him his entire career.
I don't think it just plagued him. I mean, the reality is we have way more resources right now to help artists deal with things
Yes.
that we don't know how to manage or can't manage, whether they are mental, whether they're emotional, that a lot of artists back then didn't really have. So that's why we see some of these artists from back then dealing with some of the things that we might see as off or whatever, but the reality is the only difference is little such and such now has a therapist, has the tools, and hopefully a great support system to deal with those things. And I'm not saying that to say that there were certain things that you decide that on your own. But when you think about somebody like Jaco Pastorius, we all know that. You know, when you think about the long list of artists that we look at now, it's like, whoa, whatever words you want to use, they were strange or off. They just didn't have the resources that are available right now.
Charles did try.
He did, especially near the end from what.
But even early on, he had his psychiatrist write liner notes for one of his albums.
Oh, that's right.
You know, and he checked himself in the hospital.
Yep.
He was aware.
Yeah.
He had self-awareness. And that volatility also contributed to his work and his compositions, you know, and people working with him, you know, recognize that. But yes, I mean, how many people have a psychiatrist write liner notes
For the record.
This is true.
Yeah.
Can we hear another piece of music?
of Wednesday night prayer meeting, which we never actually. I think there's one recording of the big band actually playing the full piece, but it was always used as a set ender at the end of the set. But as I was sitting there playing that and thought about this, the other thing that I enjoyed about being in the Mingus Big Band is that he had arrangers that, well, he didn't, sorry. Sue had arrangers come in years later and arrange some of his music. And we all knew that that was not how Mingus intended it to sound. And I always appreciated her openness to hearing some of the songs recreated. One of them is a tune called MDM that was a tune he wrote later. And we did a record, and they asked Robin Eubanks to do the arrangement. And I don't know how familiar you are with Robin Eubanks, but Robin Eubanks, great trombonist, also was a part of a movement years ago called the M-Bass. And it was more electronic stuff and odd time signatures. And so he brought that to this arrangement. And I remember being nervous. I'm like, Sue's not gonna like this arrangement. Sue's not. And it actually went on the record. And if you get a second, check out that record. It's a great record. And because of that, Sue allowed some younger arrangers, younger as far as didn't have an experience with Mingus, to arrange some of that music. And it's really cool hearing a different interpretation of some of those songs. Steve Slagle, some of his arrangements. There's one, Boris Kozlov did some arrangements for the big band. So when you go back, because I hope you do, and you look at the discography of the Mingus Big Band, make sure you look and see who the arrangers are of some of those pieces. It's not really, I was always upset because it was not easily found. And I've also found that a lot of record labels don't like to put a arranger on there, especially if there are multiple arrangers. So if you look at, you gotta really look hard to find who the arrangers are on a Mingus Big Band record. But they're there. And check out the ones that are some of the younger arrangers. There was also Cy Johnson, who I definitely was blessed to play with and under as he conducted. Those arrangements were more exactly what Mingus was looking for, because he had literally recordings of Mingus saying, go to this part, I want the flute right here, and we listened to some of those recordings, so it was very specific, exactly what Mingus wanted. So playing those arrangements by Cy, they were great, but they were literally his transcription to a certain extent of what Mingus wanted. But when you get to some of the other arrangers, Frank Lacey also, Conrad Herwig, some of the other arrangers, it's really cool hearing this music done and interpreted a different way. I would go after 2004 to find some of those records. The ones early on were mostly Cy and the earlier arrangers. Any other thoughts? Life, history?
I'm curious whether you feel he was especially protective of his sound, and if so, what? Like, I know he wouldn't work with Rudy Van Gelder. He said, like, that's not, because Rudy Van Gelder has his own sound, and I want my sound. Like, was he particularly protective of his sound, and if so, do you have any sense why?
You're about to get me in trouble here, man.
I don't mean to. We can talk after.
I think any artist who doesn't want to record a Rudy Van Gelder and didn't want to record a Rudy Van Gelder back in the day was a smart artist. I love the sound of those Blue Note records, but they all sound the same. Rudy, and he was very great engineer. I'm not disputing that, but it all sounded the same. And he was very specific about how he wanted you to set up in the studio. It's different now that his family's running, but it's different now. But you couldn't, there were certain ways if a bass player came in and wanted to have a direct line, which I'm not a big fan of, but if the bass player wants it, that's their sound, that's what they want. He wouldn't do it. So I understand why Mingus didn't want to record there. So I don't know, so I would say yes. protective of his sound, and we all should be. And because that's the biggest part of us. That's the biggest part of us. You know, they see us first when we step on the bandstand, and the second thing, they hear you. So, you know, and we all have very distinctive sounds, whether you're talking about the bass, how you pull the strings, or what size bass you have. You know, I'm struggling because I don't normally sit lower. I sit higher than the piano. So even those things, so I become, but that's me. You know, all of us have a different sound, and we all should be protective of our sound. But when you say it, and when you say it about someone like Rudy Van Gelder, you consider overly protective. But I don't think you are. I think you should be protective of us.
Another question back there?
Yeah, it's not related to the fellow we are talking about, but I would like to know how old were you when you showed interest in music? I'm a grandma, I have 2 young grandchildren. I want them to get interested in the music, so what is the best way I can trick them to it? Well, it has to come naturally, right?
That's what
You know, I mean, make them eat their peas and spinach and stuff, but, you know, I mean, I grew up in a house of music, so
Yeah.
my mother was an opera singer, my father was a playwright, and professor, as I said, at Rutgers and Trenton State in New Jersey, so I grew up around the arts. We'd always have poetry readings and you know, people would be over the house. So the arts was right there, you know, but my brother played basketball and my sister's a high school principal. It didn't hit me until I left New Jersey. I left New Jersey in the 6th grade, and I moved. In New Jersey, all I wanted to do was ride bikes, you know. But the music was there. I was going to piano lessons. My mother was taking me to piano lessons, but I wasn't interested in music. When we moved to Philadelphia, we moved to a neighborhood that didn't have a bunch of kids. So there, my bike riding days were out the window, and I was like, okay, here's the piano. I might as well try to be friends with it, you know. So but that came on my time. All you can do is just keep introducing them, play the music around, play any music, just keep exposing them. But, you know, let the desire to be in love with this music be one that they choose.
Very good. So just play the music, bombard them with music.
Yeah, just keep doing that.
Absolutely. Well,
Thank you.
Orrin Evans, thank you so much. I am just in awe of you all, the audience that came out for this event this afternoon. The questions and comments, hearing Mingus playing the piano at Rutgers for hours. I mean, this is just incredible. And so continue to keep coming out to the programs here. We do a lot. Get on our mailing list and come back tonight for the concert with Alan Johnson and Orrin Evans. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And again, thanks for coming this afternoon.